This is Lachlan Swanson, the USGO for MMUN 61. In this video, I'll be going over the writing process for MMUN. I'll address expectations for delegates as they develop their ideas into draft resolutions, as well as some new concepts that new delegates may want to know before they engage in the writing process themselves. I'll be speaking primarily to and for those new delegates, but hopefully there's some content here that more experienced delegates can learn from as well. The writing process is what I would consider one of the three core elements of MMUN that take place at conference, joining interpersonal negotiation and public speaking. Put at its most broad context, the writing process is the method by which delegates will take their initial research and positions outlined in their position papers and turn those into written documents expressing both their ideas and the ideas of their colleagues. In order for a delegate to achieve their position goals, they'll need to write resolutions composed of clauses that identify issues the international community is facing and propose solutions or other actions to address those problems. A resolution should represent a cooperative effort of multiple delegates. Writing up an entire resolution by yourself is both an enormous amount of work and unlikely to find much success. It's hard to convince people to support a document that they had no hand in writing. In addition, the ideas, observations, and actions outlined in a resolution should reflect the study that delegates have done in preparation. Calling for actions that have already been done or actions beyond the scope of the UN is not a recipe for success in committee. Your resolution should take into account actions that have already been done and the general trajectory of the UN's activities over its history. When you begin your first session, your chair will share a link to a Google Doc template that you must use for your working paper. Submissions not on the template will not be considered and edited. Your resolutions will need to start with ideas. This might be an observation about a problem a country or region is facing, or a goal laid out by prior UN documents. For instance, you could compare data on the progress we've achieved towards one of the Sustainable Development Goals to the targets outlined within the 2030 Agenda. Think about what kind of methods could lead to success both in terms of your own country's policy goals and the general inclinations of international groups. Once you've thought about and developed that idea, you'll want to write it down. Each idea should go with its own clause or clause pair. I'll explain a little about clause construction in a moment, but a clause is fundamentally a short paragraph that describes the idea you're addressing and the method by which you address it. Once you and other delegates have worked together to write out some clauses, you'll want to make sure they're all in one document, referred to as a working paper. We'll have a template for you to use in Google Docs that should handle the formatting and indicate the gist of working paper construction. Again, clauses and working papers submitted off the template won't be valid for consideration by the dais, so make sure that you're using those resources. Finally, following a series of back and forth edits with the dais, you and your colleagues will have your working paper recognized as a draft resolution, at which point you'll be given a code by which to refer to it and will be able to move it to the floor. Once a document is on the floor, no further work should be done to the draft resolution itself. At that point, any changes made will need to be done through amendments, which will be voted on individually with the draft resolution during voting procedure. Your instructors may have their own ways of teaching you how to write clauses, so I don't want to step on any toes by defining a right and a wrong way to do clause construction. However, these are some elements that are relatively common across all methods, and are certainly elements that I used when I was writing clauses as a delegate myself. Generally speaking, clauses are written in pairs, one referred to as a preambulatory clause and one referred to as an operative clause. Preambulatory clauses, or preambles, make up approximately the first half of the resolution. These clauses are used to draw attention to a problem, to recognize historical perspectives, or in some other way provide context to an issue of the international community. They tend to start with phrases like recalling, emphasizing, acknowledging, and other similar words. The preambulatory clause should not be where you describe the action you're going to take. Preambles give the setup for your action, which will appear in the operative clause. The operative clause is where you follow through with something for the international community to actually do about the problem. They make up the second half of the document, and usually start with phrases like calls upon, urges, suggests, and the like. In your operative clause, you'll want to identify the action being taken and some combination of what group is doing the action, where that action is being done, when an action should be started or completed by, and how an action will be done. Basically, your preambles provide the rationale for an action, and then the operative provides that action itself. I mentioned a couple of phrases ago, above that a couple of phrases that each clause type can start with. Those are referred to as initiating phrases, and you can find a few examples of clauses with a variety of initiating phrases in your delegate handbook. There are also some grammatical elements that are the same for each clause. All preambles should end with a comma, while all operative clauses should end with a semicolon except the last clause, which ends in a period, or an operative clause that has subclauses, in which case the operative clause should end in a colon and each subclause should end in a semicolon. Next, I'll go over the general structure of a working paper. Typically, your teachers will either instruct you to use the caret or hourglass forms for working paper and resolution structure. What this refers to is the organization of clauses relative to each other and their scale. In both versions, the broadest and most expansive preamble comes first. In the example here, the preamble is referring to the Charter, which is the fundamental document of the United Nations and the most all-encompassing document possible. Generally speaking, you then work down the preambles in scope. The most specific clauses of the preambular clauses should come at the end of the first half, with the medium specificity in the middle. For the caret form, you then start over. You put in the operatives in the order of the preamble, so each pair can be quickly referred to based on its pair. With the hourglass, you work the opposite way. Your operatives are listed in the reverse order of the preambles, with the most specific first and the broadest last. Make sure the rest of your caucus is on board with whichever form you choose, and be aware that the chair may suggest reordering based on their own preferences for editing purposes. In my experience, chairs have typically embraced the caret form as opposed to the hourglass form. The sample resolution that you can see a snippet of here also includes some parts at the top that are important to pay attention to. In particular, the submitted by should of course refer to whichever committee you were in. The submitted to should be referring to whichever committee you're in. In addition, the distinction between sponsors and signatories is relevant. Typically, sponsors are delegations that played a direct role in writing that document, while signatories are other delegations that support discussion of the content but did not necessarily provide any content of their own to this particular document. The division is most relevant when amending draft resolutions. If all sponsors accept an amendment, it is treated as friendly and automatically incorporated into the text. Be conscious of who a document's sponsors are when you are interested in amending a draft resolution. Once your group has put some ideas down on paper and is satisfied with the content you've covered, you'll be ready to submit the working paper to the dais. When you do so, our staff will go over your clauses, looking for content issues that can be improved. Maybe they'll suggest a program that already exists to accomplish a goal of yours, or they'll point out a different way of thinking about an issue. Whatever they do, they'll return your document in a thoroughly marked up state with suggestions for changes. They'll call your caucus up, or at least the sponsors of the document, and explain some of the ways they think your paper can be improved. They might even recommend that you talk to another group to merge the two documents. Don't be alarmed if there are a lot of recommendations. It's the job of the dais to help you achieve clarity and consistency with the real world, and our staff's research background and experience means there will be many ways to do that. After a couple rounds of submissions for edits and returning your paper, you'll eventually achieve a point where your working paper is of high enough quality for the dais to accept as a draft resolution. The specific criteria can be found in the delegate handbook. At that point, your work on that paper is largely done. What you should then be doing is engaging with other groups to understand what they wrote about or explaining what your own draft resolution encompasses. You might want to use this time to write amendments to your own draft resolution to bring other delegates on board, or create and provide amendments for other draft resolutions so that you can support them. You should now have at least a general grasp of how to write and even some idea of what should go into a clause. You can also keep these last things in mind as you practice writing your clauses and organizing your position. If you have any questions about style or specifics of the content presented in this video, you can refer to your delegate handbook for some more in-depth explanations. You can talk to your own more experienced Model UN delegates from your own delegation, or you can reach out to me at usgo@mmun.org and I'll do my best to answer any questions. Thanks for watching.